I'm Tyler Shores. I manage the University of Cambridge ThinkLab. The ThinkLab works on bigger picture challenges that benefit the best from multidisciplinary researchers and approaches. How do we make workspaces, physical and online workspaces, better for everyone? What are some of the things that we've learned in the past 3-4 years about our working habits and what works for people and what doesn't? The future of work is neurodiverse. A lot of our lives are based on habits. Our habits change with every app, with every update that happens on our phone, every new device that we introduce into our lives. How do we get out of that automatic habit and behavior mindset? How do we be a little more conscious? Small changes lead to big changes. I'm Tyler Shores. I manage the University of Cambridge ThinkLab. My background, it's hard to summarize. It takes a couple sentences to summarize, actually. I have a background in tech, so that I used to work at Google in the Mountain View, California headquarters, and I ran Authors at Google, which is essentially Google's version of TED Talks, a while before even TED Talks was a thing. And we put those videos online for anyone to see for free. I worked in startups. I've worked at Stanford University in online education, and also I've served as a nonprofit director of an educational nonprofit in Los Angeles, California. And before all of that, I was a school teacher. So somehow all of that brought me to Cambridge here, where in addition to ThinkLab, I research digital habits, digital well-being, and productivity. So the ThinkLab, I like to describe what we do as we act as a little bit of a research startup within the larger university itself, which is where we're based right here. So this is the University of Cambridge Old Schools, and we're in one of the rooms that used to function as part of the university library a couple hundred years ago. But the ThinkLab works on bigger picture challenges that benefit the best from multidisciplinary researchers and approaches. So for example, we're working with BBC right now on the future of work and accessibility and neurodiversity and inclusion. How do we make workspaces, physical and online workspaces, better for everyone? What are some of the things that we've learned in the past 3-4 years about our working habits and what works for people and what doesn't? So we recruit teams of researchers and students from all across the university in various departments, whether it's engineers, education, psychology, English literature, neuroscientists, and everything in between, to bring a very unique perspective on working on some of these problems. And we're very output driven. So sometimes that'll mean original research. Sometimes that'll mean pilot studies, strategies, helping them design things like games, which I can't talk too much about yet, but kind of everything in between. So we try to look for impact. How do we work on measurable positive impact on these challenges across different industries? I'll steal a headline from Microsoft, which is the future of work is neurodiverse. Totally agree with that, in the sense that there's been quite a shift in terms of thinking about neurodiversity, accessibility as, these are things that we have to work on, and these are kind of nice to haves. But we're learning more and more, and it's not just one industry, it's not just tech, it's not just a couple of things. These challenges apply to everyone, everywhere. So getting things right, learning about one of our operating principles is co-design, which is the idea that learning from the people whose work and experience is impacted by the decisions that we make, hearing from them, making sure that the people who have these lived experiences are actually getting input and we talk to them directly. It's tell us what you're struggling with. That goes beyond just the sort of traditional questionnaires or surveys that you would get from employees about how much do you like this? We try to drill into the 100 little things that don't necessarily come up on an everyday thing that we talk about. How do we get to those things, and how does this benefit everyone? So it is something across industries. It's something we're continuing to engage with our collaborators at Google, at BBC, at other organizations. So it's been one of our main areas of focus of research and project work over the past couple of years. And there's a lot more work that we couldn't be doing and hope to do in this area. I mean, what I'm excited about is, especially since COVID, we're still kind of in a period of figuring things out. There's been a lot of change just in terms of everything from big picture stuff, the nature of our work, from going in physical places to more of a hybrid or an entirely remote thing. To me, that's one of the biggest questions. So answering as a researcher now, prior to COVID, one of the biggest questions was around screen time, in terms of like how much time is too much time to be spending on this, that, and whatever. That entirely went out the window during COVID, when we could only be on screens really to reach the rest of the world. So it's like, okay, now we're all on screens for many, many, many hours during the day. Let's shift to thinking more about our quality of screen time rather than just quantity. What are the sort of things, and I'm not anti-social media or anti any of these things. Like, we all have our digital habits about where do we get our news? Where do we get our entertainment? Where do we find like ways to connect? Chances are that involves a screen for most of us, but thinking in terms of quality, in terms of like and the answer might vary very much for you. You might be a news junkie where sometimes news stresses me out. So we're going to have very different answers about some of these sort of things, but thinking less in terms of the number of minutes or hours that we spend on a platform, as opposed to like, what is that doing for us? Like, what is the ripple effect it's having on the rest of our, like, working and personal lives? Those are the kind of things I'm really interested in right now. Squiggly careers tend to be the people who have long answers, long, complicated answers to tell me about yourself and what led you to the work that you're doing now. So oftentimes that means different roles, different industries, different areas of research, different areas of work and industry that they've worked in. And I think there's a really good book, Epstein is his last name, called Generalists, that came out in the past handful of years, but it talks about less about specialization, the idea of like, okay, I'm really good at this one thing and I have tons of experience in this one area, and making an argument for more well-rounded careers across like, what are the things, the experiences and skill sets that you've picked up across different industries and different roles and these sort of things. Some of us, if we're lucky, we might find that thing in terms of, I happen to be really passionate about this and I'm really good at it, and we stay at that for a while. A lot of times for the vast majority of us, it's a little bit of guesswork. It's a little bit of trying to figure out, I think I'm the kind of person that enjoys this, but a lot of times we don't know what we don't know, in terms of like, until we've actually done it and been like, oh, it turns out I actually hate being in meetings all day, or I hate having to do emails for 20 hours during the course of the week. And I was like, okay, that's good to know. But the super strength thing kind of comes in terms of like what you're really good at and what either you're passionate about doing or feel like you have a strong motivation for skilling up at. And that's kind of something, it's trial and error in terms of like, and I say this as someone that's pretty squiggly also, starting as a school teacher and being like, well, I really like the teaching and learning side of things. It's everything else that was actually really terrible. Even though this is a public chat, I'm happy to say that when I started my tech career, I had no idea what I was doing in terms of, like getting into all the stuff that Google does, being in Silicon Valley. But it came down to one of the first things I said during that whole application interview process, like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm a quick learner, which is kind of what it comes down to. So part of that is willing to go out of comfort zones and willing to, kind of upskill a little bit in terms of, are you the type of person, and the answer is not going to be yes for everyone. Are you the type of person that likes kind of doing something entirely different and jumping out and seeing like, okay, this is a bit of an experiment, not sure if it's going to work, but seeing if like, you want to develop diverse skill sets that have overlap. So oftentimes the older way to think about it was kind of soft skills and translatable skills and all of these things. Thinking more in terms of like, what you do and how you do it tend to be kind of like some of the key guiding questions, and going beyond just like, ooh, I want a job with this title, or I want a job with this company, and then using those things not as an end in themselves, but as a means to an end to figure out the kind of work that you want to do, and doing it the way that you want to do it and you're most passionate about. A little bit of tolerance for ambiguity can go a long way. So, like being okay in terms of like we're starting at this point and we're ending at a certain point, but how we get there is still entirely up in the air. So, embracing things that normally we'd shy away from or wouldn't think. Especially, I get very passionate about the topic of like boxing ourselves into a certain thing. I'm this kind of person or I'm this kind of researcher, so I don't know how to do these kind of things. Sometimes we have to get out of that a little bit. The example I was thinking about was during COVID, when we didn't know how long COVID was going to be in video and all that stuff. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, wow, 4 years ago, if you'd asked me, about these sort of things, I'd be like, oh, I really don't like being on video. I'm not a video person. I'm more of an in-person thing. So my preference is to just sit this out and not do video things and see how all this goes. That wasn't really an option at a certain point in terms of like, okay, got to learn how to adjust, got to learn how to talk to audiences that we can't see, dealing with the very real factors of Zoom fatigue and knowing that people are multitasking while you and I are talking right now together. How do we capture people's attention? How do we engage with strangers online? That's being kind of going into ambiguous territory, but we all have similar stories, I think, in terms of looking for those things that we wouldn't necessarily think we had to do them either by choice or not by choice, and learning if we can adapt successfully. So I think that's part of it. I think that's part of like the innovation mindset that goes into these things. So I'll give you kind of my grand definition of habits, which is it's the sort of things that we do on a regular basis that kind of form up the majority of what we do and how we do it. So a lot of our lives are based on habits. And I mean everything from the question I love to ask people is, what is the very first thing that you do in the morning? Many times, once we get into it, it's like, oh, touch my phone or check my phone. And it's like, why? It's like, oh, my phone is my alarm clock. And it's like, oh, where is your phone? It's like by your bedside or sometimes under your pillow or something like that. It's like, ah, I see. Tell me more about that. And then usually is kind of a good, key part of the habit discovery thing. It was like, oh, I'll check my phone, check my notifications and all of that. So these are some of the habitual things that we do. The digital habits thing comes in terms of I look at it from the perspective of all of the things. So both the work and the living components. So we all have different things that we've just evolved over the past few years, over the past several years. The reason why I'm interested in digital habits is that they change so rapidly. And the fact that a lot of these are invisible habits, that our digital habits are shaped not necessarily by our conscious decisions. The best kind are the ones that we decide unconsciously, but our habits change with every app, with every update that happens on our phone, every new device that we introduce into our lives. I resisted the Apple Watch for the longest time because I was like, oh, one more thing that's going to give me notifications and dings. But I was like, oh, but I like the exercise tracker and I like being able to look at my watch and see what time it is. So those are the kind of things that we consciously bring in, but those have a serious impact in terms of basically everything we do. Everything in some shape, not everything, but the vast majority of things that we do online are shaped by habits in some form or another. And a lot of those tend to be automatic behaviors. So that's the thing that is so tricky. And also what my research is kind of focusing on is how do we get out of that automatic habit and behavior mindset? How do we be a little more conscious? My goal is not to scare people away and say, don't check your email and don't be on social media and don't use these apps. But can we do this a little more consciously to see, step back and see, are these habits working for you? Yes, no? Would you like to do a little bit less of this? How can we help you do those sort of things? But a lot of overlap. We have thinking habits, we have doing habits. Your question about kind of we work and we live not just with our brains, right? So it's also our whole bodies. So everything from simple things since COVID, a lot more people for a while were reporting neck pain and headaches and all of these things. Why? Because we're stooping down and hunched in front of a laptop, and sitting and crouching and all of these things are bad for us, which impacts our mental performance. So knowing simple stuff like that we live and work and think with our whole physical bodies, these are habitual interactions and like states that we get into. So just realizing those little tweaks. I think a lot of these are little, some habits are big, but a lot of them involve little steps along the way. We have a lot more control over than we think we do. The simplest one that I would recommend in terms of just when it comes to multitasking and checking things is we can probably all turn off a lot more notifications than we have, whatever it is. I was just talking to students about this yesterday morning in terms of like, can you count how many notifications that you get during the course of the day? Just humor me on this in terms of like how many WhatsApp, how many news app, how many text messages, et cetera, et cetera. Most people are shocked by the number that it is. And I was like, okay, how many of those were actually time sensitive that required something like right away? Usually the number is very small. So paring back on our notifications is one. Easier said than done. They're habits for a reason in terms of like, oh, but I'm used to this. But used to isn't the same thing as works best for us. So starting with notifications is one. The other one in terms of just like we all multitask and have a million different things, 100 different browser tabs that we've got open at any given moment. One simple tip that I still use very often is just writing things down. I call it my distractions pad in terms of, let's say you're working on something, you're working on an email, a report or something like that, and then you have random thought, I need to Google this, or I need to like look up this other thing. Sometimes I'll just write that thing down like very quickly on a piece of paper right next to me. So it's my thinking spot. And it turns out that most of the time we don't care about those things. It's our brains craving novelty to do some of those other things. When you look at it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes later, we don't actually care about these things. It's just kind of like, it's like, yeah, that wasn't that important actually. It feels important in the moment. So notifications, number one, and distractions pad, number two, would be the quick tips I would give everyone. I guess I'm a big believer in small tweaks. So this would cover a number of the topics that we've talked about. So small changes, like small steps that we can take. Whether it's I want to try to check my phone or get 10% less notifications, or in an innovation and mindset kind of from a perspective, I want to test out or seek out one new piece of information, or one news source or one new expert that I've never heard of before once during the week, so that we can kind of get out of our routines and things that we check and things that we think about. Small changes lead to big changes. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. These are cumulative things. So I guess that would be my my small recommendation for everyone to see and test it out, see how that actually works for them.